computer. We want to do that because we want them to be integrating this cyber and digital culture into everything they do. And that's part of what I see as missing, part of what's happening. And I think in this discussion about this generation that's ahead of us in some way, they're only ahead of us in the sense of their savviness and ability to use the tools that everybody's creating here. They adopt them quickly, they push the envelope much faster than us, they figure out how they can do it more than you even thought they could do it when you first put the thing out there. But it doesn't mean that they're actually that smart about being secure. So we just need to bring that into balance a little bit more. They need to be cyber savvy, and look at, this is an incredibly, these are a digital literate group of people we're bringing up. They're going to push the envelope way out there for us, but they have to get the security message as well. We have to get that early, I think.
So I view this in two ways. One is we work with Facebook, MySpace, and Twitter on helping to secure that infrastructure. We've seen a huge amount of threats in the last couple of weeks, frankly, on Twitter. And they're going after, current, here we go. They're going after current events.
He's the threat. You're the problem.
And so it's the irony of this situation you have with the internet, which is at its core does not contain security. It was never built or designed to have any security in the core architecture of the internet, which has allowed it to grow very, very quickly. Well, the same is true of Twitter. Great, information sharing service, basically no security. And so there are steps needed now that we're starting to see outbreaks and attacks being, coming through Twitter and Facebook to actually protect folks. Frankly, I think, but to the issue of children and education, I actually see older people sharing more information than I see younger people sharing on Twitter. It's pretty interesting because I think that my son's 18, he's grown up with this stuff, and he's probably less prone potentially than someone in the boomer generation or Gen X to share information. And frankly, I think in many cases, the younger generation is educating the older generation about these technologies, not the other way around. So I think we have to look to that sort of aspect and say, well, how can we learn from our kids? We have a program that's ongoing right now with the USPTA. We have a free service called onlinefamily.norton, which is really all about enabling dialogue between children and parents. And it's a protection service where parents can install an agent on their kid's computer and then go to the web and view what's going on their kids' systems. And rather than being a big brother kind of approach, it's very it's more about enabling dialogue so that the parent can say, hey, I noticed you created a Facebook account, you're 14, you listed your age as 21, let's have a conversation. So that's a new service that we have launched, and it's free. And so there's a huge element of education there. And in fact, right now we're running a campaign through the PTA where schools can compete to get the most number of students registered. And then there's a large element of education on that site so that parents can basically just learn about what it is that their kids are doing online and why it's important that they need to talk to their kids about what they're doing online.
Good. If I may add just one thing about this education component, especially in the classroom, goes back to Phil's point. Here's the huge opportunity. The opportunity is to really build a new culture, new group of citizens who will be responsible citizens in the digital space. And just as we had civics lessons 20, 30, 50 years ago and brought up very responsible citizens in the industrial world, I think the opportunity is very huge in as much as we approach it more from the point of view of what's their responsibility, how good policies can be made, how they can be good citizens and internationalists as well. So what we will actually come out with is a far more robust culture in the digital space. And I think so that's where while we are protective, while we have to be sure that we fend off the bad guys, but I think so there's an opportunity to really turn this into a very positive and a powerful movement, so to say.
So I'd like to continue down that road because I have a question. I want to see if we maybe have some questions from the audience, but I'll ask this question if we've got microphones and get them prepared. But I deal regularly with CEOs, CIOs, CISOs, people who've lost hundreds of millions of dollars in real cash, people who've lost their next generation products, the R&D for those products, et cetera, and still finding it difficult within those companies, even with that significant impact on their bottom line, finding it a challenge to really get them to understand why this is important. When we're talking about this generation, how can we incentivize? I mean, merely providing kids the education and the understanding is one part, but if they don't actually see any repercussions or consequences for their failure to enact security, because quite frankly, they don't necessarily see anything missing off their computer. The resources of their computer are oftentimes used to attack other computers through botnets and the like. I'm just wondering if there's any way, and any thoughts on how we might be able to, in addition to the very important education and understanding about the threat, are there things that we might be able to do to incentivize?
Well, actually, that's where I think so all of us have to take a step back as we envision the future, because as we have migrated from agricultural society to industrial society to digital society, there has to be a migration of, at the end of the day, we are a nation of rule of law. But that rule of law and that ethic has grown in the society over a period of 233 years. There's no reason why we cannot extend similar learning lessons from the past and extend them into the future to build a society that is responsible and values the rule of law in this new space that we live in and operate in, and be a leader nation. Because we are not dealing just with our own society in a closed environment, we're also dealing with a very global reach where not everybody operates with the principles of rule of law, honesty, trust, responsibility. So it's going to be, that's why it's a huge opportunity to have an impact not only within the country, but globally as well.
That's great.
Yeah,
good response.
Well, yeah, just a quick response, and then I think, Phil really touched on this earlier. I think it's starting early, right? I mean, young kids, right, expect us to keep them safe, right? That the expectation of a 3-year-old is that mommy and daddy that's part of their job, is making sure that I don't get run over, that I get fed, that all those things. Of course, as they get a little older, those things change. And so that's why I think we have to get those messages so early in their lives, so that their framework for some of this stuff is already created as they approach and start to use the technology that we actually can't even define that they're going to have right now when they get there. In the same way that when we let them out and we send kids to college or we send them out on their own, that we send them with some degree of confidence, we hope, that they can handle what comes at them in life, which is going to be complicated and hard and all those kinds of things. So I think we just, I have a lot of hope for what we can actually achieve in this arena if we put our minds to it. I think and I love Gopal's, this sort of civic responsibility. This is a civic issue. This is a digital culture. You participate as a citizen in this digital culture. How does that look? What does that look like? We need to teach people those lessons.
No, I like that response as well. I think that is an opportunity for us, if we can, through programs like this, continue to get this message out, that instill that as people are growing older. We have any questions for our panel from the audience? We have one gentleman here.
Hi, my name is Frank Angelelli. I'm Astral Computing based in New York. Gopal, I took interest in what you were speaking about local government. I do IT security consulting for local government agencies and businesses as well. And I notice when I go into businesses that require PCI, there's a standard level that everybody knows they need to meet. But I don't seem to see something similar at the local level. And the other aspect of that is, as a consultant, I go up against other consultants, and very often we run into instances where people believe they are secure, yes, and they are very not secure. Yes. So I think in that, I really enjoyed this conversation. I think it's great. And the two things that I think might be helpful here is like a stop, wait, and think first mentality for the business people, because they move very forward in implementing stuff that's grossly insecure without thinking about it. And the other side is, I would love to see some of the guidelines that surround federal infrastructure kind of moved towards that local government level, so they have a little bit more awareness about, hey, this is something we should do.
Well, the challenge that we have is this. At the local level, first of all, we cannot slow down the cycle of innovation. We did not do that in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Actually, we want, right? The challenge, especially particularly in government, is that we have very little room to do what is called R&D, to play around with different technologies, make mistakes. It has to be bulletproof, silver bullet solution. So it makes it very difficult for us to do the right stuff. And when we try, there's very little room for failure. However, as we play around with technologies and as they evolve, I think it behooves us to take a step back and say, what is the architectural design of the future? There's much talk recently about cloud computing, and especially in government, yes, it makes sense, but we have got to figure out a lot of solutions to making sure it is secure cloud computing. So where the vendor community and the consultants can play a very powerful role is to encourage movements towards consolidation, towards moving towards an enterprise architecture approach, because that'll help solve the larger problem as well as the smaller problems. But what happens, and you're right, that in the quest to provide quick solutions, we sometimes perpetuate bad behavior or bad implementations. And it's a balancing act. But certainly we in government who are state CIOs can benefit immensely if the private sector was to encourage local units of government to move to a more of a consolidated, well-architected environment. It'll help the situation greatly.
I'd like to add a couple of things to that. We've talked extensively, Gopal just talked a little bit about the technology or architecture piece. We've talked extensively about the awareness piece and the norm building piece, making sure that we all have a common baseline of what we ought to do. There are a couple other things that I think are important here. One is making it easier for people to do the right thing. I mean, it remains too hard. There are basic things everyone can and should do, but we need to continue to evolve the technology so it is, the double-click easy, fast, and cheap part of security. There'll always be things people need to do, but it's incumbent upon all of us, and this is a place where a key part of the shared responsibility is industries, to continue to raise the level of the technology so doing the right thing is simple to do. The second thing we clearly need to do as members of an ecosystem is help people make the right decisions. And this goes back again to the question that was raised before. We're still in an era where decisions about security are made based on religion rather than science. I believe this is good, or I saw that ad campaign, and that's a cool thing to do. Which practice works? Well, X tells me Y tells me Z. I'm not sure really what to do. We got to provide people the data and the clear mechanisms so that they can make effective decisions, and then we can all harness the power of the market and the distributed nature of the internet to drive a more secure ecosystem.
Excellent. We'll take another question.
While the mic moves, I'll just add one point, and back to your question earlier, Shawn, about incentivizing. I think a very concrete recommendation would be around the area of measurement. So I live in Los Angeles. Our chief of police just stepped down, and we were able to see over a 4-year period, crime per capita went down in a variety of different ways. You can't see that on the internet today. And when you go back to this idea of making things tangible, well, and the old sort of management mantra about you can't improve what you can't measure, well, let's get some measurements in place, national measures of cybercrime. So I'm advocating a cybercrime per capita metric, a very simple metric that would allow us to measure progress around the country in the different areas, whether it's at the government level or whether it's in the consumer space. Now, that's a difficult metric to come up with to actually measure it, but it's an important step, I believe, in terms of being able to, if you go back to the example of the small business who says, I think I'm secure, well, if that business had a metric that they saw on a regular basis for their particular industry that said, hey, cybercrime is on the rise in your industry, So you need to pay more attention. I think a metric and a number, something that is tangible and easy to understand, would be a good step forward for the industry.
My name is Andy Purdy with George Mason University International Cyber Center. To the last point you made, the Bureau of Justice Statistics of DOJ recently published a pilot of a cybercrime survey of 35,000 businesses that is available for people to take a look at. But 2 points I wanted to make. One, on social networking, as some of you may know, and this is to Chris Painter's point, that there's an awful lot of progress being made, and to a point he didn't make, that the cyber coordinator is not going to be the panacea. It's all this other stuff that people are doing is critical as well. The CIO Council last week released a report on social networking. The working group on social networking, chaired by a DHS employee, put out a very important paper on social networking and risks and standards and things that could be applied, and I commend that to you. Secondly, the question about how you can measure and what are you thinking about doing or going to do about trying to assess the effectiveness of awareness training. And I'm thinking particularly of things like creating learning moments, like fake phishing emails among your organization, or something, I don't know if Peter Cassidy is still here with the Anti-Phishing Working Group, but they have done a partnership with the eFraud Alliance and Bank of America and others to redirect the traffic that's going to a phishing website to create a learning moment. And they did one example where 55,000 people came, rather than going to the phishing website, they came to the learning moment that basically told them, you probably shouldn't have done X, Y, or Z. Are you guys doing any of that, or are you planning to do any of that kind of activity?
Let me just comment on that for a second. First of all, I think you're talking about the Anti-Phishing Working Group's landing page project. This is exactly the kind of project I'm talking about, where it wasn't, the Anti-Phishing Working Group is a coalition of a lot of different folks. I mean, it's the banking industry, it's the tech industry, it's nonprofits. Like APWG is one of our strongest partners on some of the work that we do. That collective spirit to come up with a way to uniformly educate people at an important moment. I think that's a great example. We probably need lots more of those to be really successful. And we also need higher adoption rates of the tools that do get developed as well. So I think it's a perfect example of the kind of success we can have.
We do have exactly what you have described in our products today. So, we were one of the founding members of the APWG, and when you hit a phishing site, there is a learn more about phishing kind of page that it takes you to, and kind of explains the whole situation to the end user.
Excellent. I'll go back to the audience in a minute, but before I do, let me ask a question. We talked during the prior panel, made mention of it here this afternoon, about the international aspects of the problem of the threat. I'm interested in your thoughts as it relates to cybersecurity and awareness, et cetera. What are the challenges we face internationally, and what are the opportunities that we have internationally? I'll just open it up to the group.
Well, I wrote an article recently, it appeared in Governing Magazine, where I basically proposed is that in the 50s, we were confronted as a nation with a great challenge with communism. And at that time, our defense doctrine was centered around the whole notion and idea of mutually assured destruction. And that prevented, for the last 70 years, we've not had a nuclear attack and or dropping of a bomb. I think what is needed is a similar doctrine that is created in the international space, where it's centered around mutual assured survival, because if G20 countries collectively own 85% of the global economy, they all have a vested interest in not in having norms and behavior put in place so that they are aware that and they need to be protective of that of commerce space. And to do that, I think so we as a nation will have to take the lead. And to achieve that, of course, we'll have to have a very strong deterrent posture, because the best defense is to have the most powerful deterrent posture. And in this space, in this international space that we operate in, where there are countries that do not mean us well and by design have constant attacks coming our way, as well as rogue entities, worst off, who can literally at a click bring down major systems and create major harm. I think there is a need for a very a powerful doctrine similar to the one that we had in the 50s and the 60s.
I think I'd add, there are a lot of problems we face internationally, but with regard to where we want to be, it's hard to find a better statement than the one the Attorneys General of the G8 made back in 1998, which was essentially, was one of their 10 principles, that there should be no safe havens for cybercrime. And we're not there yet. We don't have that same broad set of international norms where we all agree across the 200-odd countries that exist in the world that there should be no safe havens, that there's a common understanding. Now, that's not true in the physical world either. There are different laws. But the internet is different because I'm much closer to somebody in the United Kingdom or France or China or Japan or Korea online than I am in the physical world. And the clashes between our cultures and what we expect are brought into sharp relief. The crime can occur at internet speed, and despite the great efforts and continuing efforts of law enforcement and operational entities within various governments, we don't have mechanisms that allow law enforcement, operational entities like U.S. CERT to operate at internet speed. We've gotten better, we've gotten faster, but the crime is still faster. So that's going to be a continuing challenge for us and puts relief on the no safe havens point.
Good.
So
Go ahead.
So we have more than half of our customers outside the U.S., and this is a huge problem. This is one of the biggest problems that I think our industry faces, which is it is very, very difficult to track down and prosecute cyber criminals right now. I was just in London where we had the Chancellor of the Italian National Police Special Unit for Cybercrime, and he's also the representative to the G8, and talking about operating on internet time, the way that he goes through the process of getting information from the United States about crimes that are committed, cross borders, is he writes a letter on a letterhead and sends it, and it takes 2 months to get the information back from the appropriate authority. So the system is just not working. Interpol, which was, I think, the organization that was set up, some time ago, is not really involved that much at all in this area, and that's something that needs to be evolved because that's the kind of organization that you would need to set up to start having an impact in this area. And then finally, talking about no safe havens, you're right, and there are safe havens right now. Where these crimes are being committed is not in G20 and G8 countries. And so how do you go after these guys when you're not going to be able to get them where they are?
Just a couple quick points from, I'm not the cybercrime expert, but I think that a couple of things here, one from the awareness side as well. I think the internet starts to redefine what jurisdiction means, certainly in the United States and those kinds of things. I think that's something that as a society we need to look at, where crimes actually get committed, how they get reported, all those kinds of things could be changing. You talked about through the paper trail. I think our whole criminal justice system is based around a non-digital environment for crime. But on the awareness side, actually, I think there's a lot of possibility. We've been talking a lot about the United States where the cat is already out of the bag. Everybody has a computer, people have smartphones, all those things. A lot of developing countries, that's not true yet. The internet is just arriving. And as it just arrives, hopefully we can take some of the lessons that we've learned, right, to get to them early. And I know a lot of the companies in this room, you do work globally, you are in these emerging economies, you're bringing the technology in there. That is a really great moment to not make not say we've made mistakes, but we let the technology get out ahead of us. They're there now, we're at the moment of sort of conception to be there to help make it more safe and secure from day one. I think that's an opportunity that all of us probably have to take advantage of in some way.
That's great. I think we have time for one more question. If somebody's got a question they'd like to answer. Do I see a hand? Let me just follow up on your point, Rowan, regarding the sharing of information, recognizing some of the challenges we face in law enforcement. From a law enforcement perspective, we've embedded FBI agents in many national police agencies around the country just to try and overcome that, to facilitate the expeditious sharing of intelligence so that we can actually effect arrests and take some of the bad guys off the playing field, including some countries that for a variety of reasons, don't want us to disclose, whether it's political reasons or operational concerns, that they're actually cooperating with us and some of those countries that we might consider safe havens. So there is, from a law enforcement perspective, there's a lot of coordination with my agency and the service and other agencies in that regard. Let me before we wrap up, ask you all a question that people ask me all the time, and kind of when they ask, I'm not really certain always how to respond, but I always wanted the opportunity to ask the question. So, and it's kind of a combined question about the types of things that keep you up at night, and the types of things when we're talking about the shared responsibility and the learning opportunities and the need to educate. What are the things that are coming down the road? Where are we 5 or 10 years from now, the challenges that we're going to face, and what are the types of things that we might be able to do today with the new technology as it's developed? What are the things that concern you looking forward? See, that's the answer I always give, right there.
I'll kick it off. My son asked me a question after his Mac had been infected about 8 months ago, which apparently doesn't happen if you watch their commercials. And after he wanted to know who was behind all this stuff, he asked me a question, and this is the question that keeps me up at night. He said, "Are you winning against the bad guys?" And I think as an industry and a society, we are not winning right now. I think that's the answer to that question. It took me a while to find out and to dig into a lot of the data that we had and that other folks had. That is what keeps me up at night. If cybercrime is increasing, if crime is increasing, and we're not doing a good enough job at combating it, then that's the mandate. That's the mandate, is to win, is to start winning and to start to turn the tide. And frankly, it is just too easy to commit crimes online. If you were a drug addict and you wanted to make a quick buck to get some money for your fix, you might go down and rob a local liquor store. There's a risk of getting shot, punched, kicked, beaten, caught by the cops, and then you get dragged down to the local courthouse and thrown in jail. Well, that same level of crime can be committed on the internet. It is much easier, it is much safer, it looks like it's a victimless crime, and it's happening all over the country and all over the world right now. And so I think that's what keeps me up at night. Is I want to see this thing get better. I don't want the internet to be hampered by or hamstrung by security concerns and bad guys. It's too big of an opportunity for the world to see improvements because of the power that it brings. I think it was Obama who said, "Great peril and great promise." So it's that great promise we have to harness, and it takes everybody stepping up and doing a lot more, because that's what it's going to take, is everybody doing a lot more.
I see three things. One is, over the last 233 years, our time has become shorter. Time to action in the agricultural society was much longer. We could deliberate, we could take a long time to arrive at policy decisions. In the industrial age, it was condensed somewhat. But in the digital era that we live in, time to action is going to be the key. 5 years is an eternity, both in terms of lost opportunity, as well as in terms of what we could do internationally. Second piece, our policymaking apparatus is still designed in a very hierarchical way, up from the local government all the way up into federal government, and that cross-jurisdictional barrier has already been broken. When something goes wrong, citizen does not care whether federal government failed, state or local government. They see government as not being able to deliver the services, and the trust in government goes down. So we've got too many jurisdictional barriers to deal with in our system from a political perspective. So that's a huge concern, because that comes in the way of looking at policy issues, whether it be crime policy or investment decisions, etc. And the third component is that we cannot stop the world, stop the clock and say, let's build the best ballpark and then people will arrive. We just have to make it as we build it as we go along. And therefore it has to be a different paradigm in terms of the public at large and all the stakeholders, including the political leadership, to allow the leeway for people to come together, build the solutions, and then keep the country and gain the country the competitive advantage we can based upon the core competencies we have in this area. Otherwise, we'll lose them because other nations can break those barriers much easily. Our system was designed to be contentious. Our system was designed to go through debates and deliberations before we can